Hi everyone, today, in this video at least, we are going to be talking about graphing trig functions. So that's graphing sine and cosine. And remember, they look like waves, in case that helps jog your memory. Alright, so let's take a look at just some basics first. Describe how to identify the different parts to the graph of a sine or cosine function given the general equation below. So this equation here is just generic, no numbers, just letters, alright, to help us remember how to get each piece. So amplitude, remember amplitude is how far up and down from the middle, or from the midline, we go. Alright, so it's how far up and down from the midline. And to get that, you take the absolute value of A. Alright, A is right here. Take the absolute value of it. It's always positive. Okay, the period is how far from start to finish. And that's horizontally. So left to right, how far. Okay, and to calculate the period, you have to remember, think back to the unit circle. A unit circle, that's one full circle, that's 2 pi. Well, the period of a sine or cosine function starts as 2 pi, and then if there is a number right here in front of theta, we call it k, you have to divide by that. So the period is actually 2 pi divided by k. Alright, the interval, remember the period is going to be a larger number. Well, a period's not going to help us get the little different pieces to it. So then we also calculate the interval. The interval is 1/4 of the period. Alright, and it tells you where to put your x values. Okay, it tells you where to put the marks on the x-axis. So to do that, we take the period and we divide it by 4. Okay, alright, moving on, the phase shift. The phase shift comes from that number right there. It is B, and remember it's always opposite, so it is left or right B, and in parentheses I'm going to write it's always opposite. Alright, and this tells you what x value to start at, so starting x value. Okay, then our vertical shift tells us the midline. So it's kind of like what y value to start at, except that can kind of depend. So we just call it the midline. Alright, so that would be up or down C. And that is not opposite. That's the same. So if you want to write that, it's the same. You don't have to do opposite. Okay, the last piece I want to remind you of, this is the starting x value, but sometimes we don't remember where to start on the y-axis. So this is where to start on a y-axis. Alright, if it's a positive sine, you start at the middle and go up next. If it's a negative sign, you start at the middle and go down next. Okay, positive cosine starts at the max, so the highest point you have, and so then it has to come down next. And negative cosine starts at the min, so the lowest point you have. Alright, that's some basics. Let's put it into practice. Alright, graph one period, just one period, of each of the following, and label all intervals. Alright, so let's start right here. Okay, amplitude is the absolute value of 2, that would be 2. Period is 2 pi divided by this number you're multiplying by x, so that would be 4. And that can simplify to just pi over 2. Alright, interval is the period, so pi over 2 divided by 4. So that's like taking pi over 2 and putting the 4 with it, since you're dividing. So that would be pi over 8. Alright, phase shift. Phase shift is inside parentheses with x, and I don't see any of that, so there is no phase shift. Alright, or it's 0 if you want to think of it. But vertical shift, I see one that's a -1, so that would be down 1, or -1. Alright, now let's take that information and do something with it. Okay, I like to start with my y-axis. I like to label that first. So I start with my midline. Remember, vertical shift, that is your midline. So if my midline's at -1, I'm going to draw a new midline at -1. See, when there's no shift, it's just 0, and that's nice. But we don't like to make it too easy for you. Alright, then my amplitude dictates how high to go from there. So my amplitude kind of gives me my max and min. Alright, it's 2 from the midline, so that would be 1, 2, that's at the point 1, because this is 0. This is -1. And then 1, 2 down, that's -3. So my highest point will be 1, my lowest will be -3. Alright, that's my y values. Now let's try my x values. Remember, you start at your phase shift, which in this case is 0. So I'm going to start right here at x equals 0. Then I'm going to go up my interval 4 times until I get to the period. Alright, so it'll be pi over 8 plus another pi over 8, that's 2 pi over 8, which is pi over 4, plus another pi over 8, that's 3 pi over 8, and plus one more is 4 pi over 8, which is pi over 2. And see how that is the period. Alright, that's a good sign. Alright, now let's graph. So, this is a positive sign because 2 is positive, and it's a sine function. So, positive sign, in case you forgot, look back up. Start at the middle, and then you go up. So, I'm going to put my point right there on my midline. My next point at pi over 8 is going to be up at the top. Then I'm just going to follow the pattern. Go back down to the middle, down to the bottom, back up to the middle. And that right there is one full period for this graph. Alright, let's try one more just to be sure. So, y equals negative cosine of 2 theta minus 1. Alright, amplitude. Well, this is really a -1, so it would be the absolute value of -1, which is 1. The period, 2 pi divided by that number there, which is a 2, so that would just be pi. And that makes my interval just pi over 4. Alright, once again, I do not see a phase shift, none, or 0. But my vertical shift is actually, once again, down 1, or -1. So, once again, I start with my y's. So, -1 is my new midline. Draw that in. Oops. Alright, that would be -1. And then my amplitude is 1, so that means I'm going up 1, that's 0, and down 1, that's -2. Alright, now move on to my x's. My starting x value is the phase shift, 0. Sweet, that makes it easy right here. And then I'm going to go up my interval. So, boom, pi over 4. Boom, 2 pi over 4, or pi over 2. Then 3 pi over 4. And lastly, 4 pi over 4, which is pi, my period. Excellent. Alright, now the last thing is to know where to start your points. Alright, this would be a negative cosine. Negatives cosines start at the min. So at 0, because of my phase shift, I'm starting at my minimum. Then go up to the middle, up to the max, down to the middle, down to the min, and draw as pretty of a curve as you can. And there you have it. Alright, so there's a couple examples of graphing. If you have questions, as always, write it down, and I'll try and answer them in class. See you later.